My name is Michael Carter, and I'm 38 years old. I've lived through many challenging times, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened in the frozen wilderness of Alaska. Even now, as I sit in the dim safety of my home, every noise sends shivers down my spine, reminding me of the terror I faced. It all began last winter when I decided to take a solo hunting trip to Alaska. For years, I had dreamed of immersing myself in the pristine, untouched beauty of the Alaskan wilderness. The idea of camping under a blanket of stars, surrounded by endless, snow-covered mountains, seemed like a perfect escape from the monotony of everyday life. I arrived at the small town of Fairbanks, where I rented a rugged Jeep, stocked up on supplies, and purchased a map that marked the remote trails I planned to explore. My destination was deep in the heart of the wilderness, a secluded spot known for its wildlife. The locals called it Shadow Ridge, but they spoke of it with unease, as if the name itself held a sinister weight. "You're heading to Shadow Ridge?" the man at the supply store asked, his face darkening. "That's no place for a man alone, especially not in winter." I dismissed his warning with a polite smile, assuming it was just the usual superstitions that often surrounded isolated places. I was wrong. By the second day of my trip, I had reached the outskirts of Shadow Ridge. The landscape was breathtaking. Rolling hills covered in untouched snow, dense forests with towering pine trees, and an eerie stillness that made every crunch of my boots on the ground seem deafening. I pitched my tent near a frozen stream and lit a small fire to keep warm as the temperature plummeted. That night, the moon was full and unnaturally bright, casting long shadows across the snowy expanse. As I lay in my sleeping bag, I heard the faint howl of a wolf in the distance. It was a haunting sound, but not unusual for these parts. I tried to convince myself it was just another part of nature's symphony. But then it came again, closer this time. The howl wasn't like anything I'd heard before. It was deeper, almost guttural, and carried a sense of malice that sent a chill through my body. It didn't sound like an ordinary wolf. It sounded wrong. I lay awake for hours, gripping the hunting rifle I had brought for protection. Outside, the howls grew louder, as if whatever was out there was circling my camp. My fire had dwindled to embers, casting flickering shadows on the walls of my tent. And then I heard the footsteps. They were heavy, deliberate, and unlike anything a wolf or bear would make. They circled my tent slowly, pausing every few steps. My heart raced as I held my breath, praying it would go away. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped right outside the tent flap. I could hear its breathing, low, raspy, and menacing. Whatever it wasn't an animal I recognized. Summoning every ounce of courage, I cocked my rifle and prepared to face the unknown. When I finally mustered the strength to unzip the tent, I was met with nothing but the still, snowy wilderness. Yet deep in the forest, I saw two glowing eyes staring back at me. They were yellow and piercing, filled with an intelligence that felt unnervingly human. The next day, I decided to cut my trip short. The tracks I found around my campsite were enormous, far larger than any wolf or bear I'd ever seen. They were also strangely human-like, with elongated toes and claw marks gouging the frozen ground. As I packed up my gear, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The forest, once serene, now felt oppressive, its shadows hiding unspeakable horrors. I drove the Jeep as far as I could, but the snowstorm that rolled in made the roads treacherous. By nightfall, I was forced to stop and set up camp again. That's when the nightmare truly began. The howls returned, louder and more frantic than before. They echoed through the trees, accompanied by the snapping of branches and the unmistakable sound of something large moving through the woods. My flashlight barely pierced the darkness, but I caught glimpses of a massive figure darting between the trees. It was tall, easily over 7 feet, with a hunched posture and fur matted with snow. Its limbs were grotesquely long, ending in claws that glinted in the moonlight. But what truly froze my blood was its face, a twisted, nightmarish blend of wolf and man. It wasn't just a creature, it was a werewolf. The next hours were a blur of terror. The beast stalked my camp, testing my defenses. It tore through the trees with terrifying strength, howling with a fury that made my ears ring. I fired my rifle into the darkness, hoping to scare it off, but it only seemed to anger the creature. When it finally attacked, it came with a speed and ferocity I couldn't comprehend. It tore through my tent as if it were paper, its glowing eyes locking onto mine. I barely managed to dodge its claws, scrambling to my feet and running into the forest. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I stumbled through the snow, my breath freezing in the frigid air. The beast was relentless, crashing through the underbrush as it pursued me. I finally found refuge in a narrow crevice between two large boulders, too small for the creature to follow. It clawed at the rocks, snarling and growling, its hot breath condensing in the icy air. I stayed there for what felt like hours, clutching my rifle and praying for dawn. When the first light of morning finally broke through the trees, the beast let out one final howl before retreating into the shadows. I made it back to Fairbanks that day, battered and traumatized but alive. When I told my story, the locals gave me knowing looks but said nothing. It was as if they had heard it all before. To this day, I can't explain what I encountered in the Alaskan wilderness. Was it truly a werewolf or some undiscovered predator? All I know is that it changed me forever. Now every full moon, I find myself staring out the window, searching the shadows for those glowing yellow eyes. And every time I hear a distant howl, I'm reminded that some things are better left unexplored. The frozen moon of Alaska hides many secrets, some of which are better kept buried.